We're going to kick things off with the Irish Daily Mail, one of the most interesting stories of the morning, an exclusive by Chris Wheeler here. Ole inquest, Woodward hauls boss in after United's miserable run. It's certainly a bit of a sensational line in the way it's positioned here, Paul. Manchester United chief Ed Woodward held crisis talks with the manager Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and his assistant Mike Phelan at the club's training ground yesterday. You do wonder if it was crisis talks or it was quite a simple sort of, listen, things haven't been going exactly our way, in the way that any CEO or MD might call in a line manager to say, well, look at...
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of unusual that he would call him in for crisis talk so soon after appointing him, because if Woodward believed he was the right man for the job 6 weeks ago, then he's still the right man now. I think maybe Woodward is the one who's feeling the pressure because, you know, I think this is I think they made a mistake. You know, I think they've appointed the wrong man for the right reasons.
Right.
And I think they went too quickly. They didn't need to appoint him so quickly. But it was just the emotion of the PSG game, in which United actually didn't play very well at all, but they got a result. They gave him the job. And I wonder, is Woodward feeling the heat of that now, that decision?
UEFA keep quiet over Delaney under-17 finals role is the other line, writes Philip Quinn there in the Mail. You're going to kick us off with the Times Ireland edition.
Yeah, the Times, really good piece today, two pieces actually, John Fallon and Paul Rowan writing about this. It's all about Delaney's role. So he's on gardening leave. He's almost like he's a self-suspended vice president or executive vice president, whatever the role was in the FAI, and now the under-17 championships are on, and nobody really knows what his role is going to be. And I think this is a championship that Delaney would have been, you know, quite involved in delivering to Ireland. So it's, you know, there's an element of sort of vanity project about it as well. But whose blazer is he going to be wearing? That's the question here. And of course, I'm sort of living for the Sunday Times every week now. Mark Tighe's revelations about what's been happening in the FAI under Delaney, and it's just hard to see how he can continue. But he's hanging on like week after week, and also John Fallon has a really interesting story this morning about this olive branch.
We might come back to that because there's a good bit of detail in it that we do want to come back to in a little bit. There's some other interesting stuff about Mo Farah that's also worth coming back to. We'll do that in a few minutes' time. The Mir we want to mention as well. Playing in Italy is my dream. Romelu Lukaku has had his say on his future. He wants out of United, and Destiny's Chilled is possibly the headline of the morning. Relaxed Klopp insists the title race is far from over and believes that fate may favour Reds in the end. That's the Mirror this morning. You've got the Sun, Paul.
Yeah, the Sun, Pogba is leaving. United players think Ole Gunnar Solskjaer can't handle Paul Pogba. There was no great surprise in that. I read just on the Pogba story, there's a quote in, I think, The Independent this morning, where Pogba says, I think the story says that Pogba is thinking of leaving because he's alarmed at how standards have fallen at Manchester United, which I think is written in nothing to do with me. I was saying earlier, it's like Basil Fawlty, when people complain to him about Manuel, like he would always say, you know, you think you only have to eat here. We have to actually live with this guy.
Think about us for the rest of the week. The Irish Examiner, meanwhile, is also to do with the title race here. The pretty cool graphic there. It's like Highlander. Pep Guardiola versus Jurgen Klopp. Only one of us will be there at the end. That's in relation to the title race. And the thoughts of Ronan O'Gara on Munster inside the Irish Examiner as well.
Yeah, and this is the Independent. Their back page is again, UEFA silence on Delaney role in under-17 competition. Danny McDonnell has a piece. Again, you know, asking questions about what is he actually going to be doing at the matches.
They have asked UEFA, Dan McDonnell has asked UEFA, and he hasn't got any reply just yet. The Irish Daily Star, better fate than never. Smiling Jurgen Klopp here, he's pretty relaxed. Destiny can still hand us the crown, says Klopp, writes Chris McKenna there. Kieran Donaghy, Dubs may have some regrets as the pressure mounts on the 5 in a row chasing Dubs. That's the Star. And the Guardian, back page, it's again a smiling Jurgen Klopp. It's great to see a smiling Jurgen Klopp. Happy to be here.
And they've gone with the Highlander line again. You know, only one of us will be there at the end, but he hasn't given up and says Burnley may test City's resolve.
Klopp insists title race is far from over, writes Andy Hunter in the Times, the Irish Times. Bernardo Principal guides City's dominance in Manchester, the most overrated, underrated player in the Premier League, maybe. Bernardo Silva there, reflections on him for Barney Ronay. And City show how vast the gulf has become with United, writes Paul Wilson. That's the Irish Times. The Herald, Reds won't splash out. Klopp vows to stick with the current squad. This is in relation to some of that conversation we've been having a little bit earlier about where to now from a Liverpool point of view. And the last one from me is the Telegraph, and the main story that we're going to focus on here is revealed the story behind Farah feud. Gabor Selassie says row over British runner's controversial coach sparked this 2-year grudge. So that's the Daily Telegraph, and there are some interesting stories that we wanted to come back to. The United one we might start with, reports that in various newspapers, the Lukaku one we mentioned a few minutes ago, that he wants to go to Italy. It seems like there might have been some contact already. It's not just something that's kind of suddenly struck him that Italian life is something for him. But Jeremy Cross, Romelu Lukaku's dropped the biggest hint yet that he could quit United, admitted that he would be tempted by a move to Italy, fueling speculation about a summer exit from Old Trafford. Playing in Serie A is a dream. It'll really be a dream.
Yeah. I don't know. He's ready for Italy. I don't know if Italy are ready for Romelu Lukaku. It is amazing. Like, I mean, a lot of these stories are generated by agents, and that seems to me to be a story that's generated by an agent. I don't know who. Maybe 20 years ago, your dream might have been to leave England to go and play in Italy. I don't think that's anyone's dream now. You know, it might be his dream because he's failed at Manchester United, but he's playing for what we're always told is the biggest club in the world. Why would he dream of going to play in Italy? I've been to matches in Italy in the last couple of years, and Serie A isn't what it was. You know, I went to a Champions League match in Rome against Atletico Madrid a couple of years ago, and they were selling cheap tickets on the street, and I bought half-price ticket, and my wife was with me, and her ticket was half of my price. Right, wow. It was a price for them.
And they're cheap to begin with, aren't they?
Yeah, they were. I mean, I think it was about €15. Right. We got into this to see a Champions League match between Rome and Atletico Madrid.
Sorry, were you saying it was a reduced price for women?
Yeah. Right. It was Mary's ticket was half of my price. So I think I paid €15, and Mary's was $7.50. And they were sold through official channels, but it felt like you were buying it from a tout. Like if somebody just wandered up to us in the street wearing a Roma strip and said, "Do you want to buy some tickets to a football match?" And I said, "What's the match?" And they said it was the Champions League match. I said, "Surely this isn't how." I
mean, it's only going to cost me $22.50, but I mean, wow.
I saw I saw Inter Milan and AC Milan in the San Siro 26 years ago, and it was full, and you know, that was Italian football to me. That was the glory. You know, it's around 91, 92. It's the glory era for Italian football, but it's not anymore. You know, and you know, Lukaku saying it's always been his dream to go and play in Italy is an indicator of where he is in his head, and where a lot of those United players are in their heads. They want to move away from a club where they have been part of the problem. You know, they've caused this slump in standards, and now they want away, and they just want to go to a club where life will be a little bit easier and the money is good. Yeah,
and one of those clubs from a Pogba point of view seems like Real Madrid. I mean, again, who the hell knows whether any of this is actually real or not, but he wants to go to Real Madrid. Does Zidane want him, given the quality he has? Remains to be seen. But good question by Oliver Kay in the Times this morning about which top class club is going to buy a lot of these players. And actually, when you break it down, he's done a list of the players. Some of the names that jumped up for me, like misfits, I think he calls them. But in terms of, it's a good way of looking at it. It sort of slightly flips it, that McTominay, Darmian, Lindelof, Valencia, Young, Lingard, Jones, Smalling, Fred, Lukaku, Mata, Shaw, Sanchez.
Yeah.
What
you can only see them going. I mean, McTominay, if I was a United fan, I'd be disappointed if they didn't keep him.
Yeah. And he's the one from that list, to be fair, that might actually sort of go on to...
Yeah, and he's a great attitude, and he, you know, often when he plays, he is United's man of the match. Rashford, I'd be surprised if he doesn't play, but that's the unusual position the United find themselves in now, that just about every player at the club is potentially up for sale.
Yeah.
There isn't any player among that you'd be desperate to keep. And a couple of years ago, you would have said it was David De Gea. I mean, David De Gea, there was one or two seasons ago, David De Gea was the difference between United being top four and United being mid-table. You know, he probably got them, 15, 20 points more than they should have had. And now he's sort of almost in Karius territory. The only difference between him and Karius at the moment is he hasn't done it in a Champions League final. He's done it in a quarter-final. He's done it in a couple of league games, but he's thrown them in. It's really hard to fathom the change that's come over him in the last couple of years, and you can only think it's maybe career disappointment. That if that fax had gone through that time when he was potentially moving to Real Madrid, and there was this fax they were waiting for that didn't come through, his life might have been different. It's almost like he's looking at it as a sort of sliding doors thing now, that he's saying, I could have been there, and look where I am.
The stadium, yeah. The other difference with Karius is that he obviously has a bank of being discussed as one of the best goalkeepers in the world behind him, so that will give him a bit more leeway, clearly, in terms of...
Yeah, but you build up this goodwill, but I think goalkeepers... when they lose it seems because it's such a confidence thing, and the next thing you're dropped, and it's very difficult to get back when you're dropped as a goalkeeper. You can wait a whole season. I mean, I keep looking at Simon Mignolet on the bench for Liverpool, just watching this great team that he was once part of. I think, will he ever figure again?
You look at great goalkeepers like Joe Hart.
And when he lost it,
some of the greats of the game.
Yeah, Mervyn Day, going back to the 70s, the West Ham goalkeeper. When it went, it went. And it's almost like a boxer's chin. Once it's been exposed, it's there and everybody knows about it. But I do wonder about De Gea, because you kind of think, where's the buyer for him? Who's going to come in for him?
John Delaney was one of the other points that we wanted to come back to. It does feature in a lot of the newspapers this morning. Philip Quinn is the one that's in front of me here. UEFA keeping quiet over Delaney under-17 finals role to the kick-off. In Dublin this day next week. He's the chairman of the UEFA Youth and Amateur Football Committee, and so by the nature of that role clearly would be expected to turn up to some of these games. Now, he's on gardening leave. The executive vice president is on gardening leave from the FAI and not entitled to turn up to any official duties. So whether that includes UEFA duties or not remains to be seen, actually, which I was just taken slightly by surprise with today, that doesn't yet been any utterances from UEFA. They have been asked, they haven't made any comment on it, but surely they've got surely somewhere they must have some sort of a protocol about gardening leave from your association results in this.
I wouldn't be thinking so much of the protocol as why would John Delaney want to be there? I know we're used in this country to have politicians with brass necks and sports administrators with brass necks, people like Pat Hickey. But what's in it for John Delaney being there? If you know that everybody, there's a potential for fans to be booing him, for Delaney out signs being held up again. He's going to be walking around shaking hands with people who have quite likely seen his performance in front of the Oireachtas committee, who've read the stories that the Sunday Times have been breaking. Why would you want to be? Isn't there 1,000? I mean, he's talking about gardening leave. Wouldn't you rather be gardening? Wouldn't you rather be anywhere in the world than in a football stadium? I don't understand it. I mean, he's got to have huge self-belief if he thinks he's going to come back from this. Like, if he thinks that in 5 years' time he'll be looking back on this as just a blip in his career and he'll still be sitting in the FAI behind a desk, I don't think the politicians are going to allow that to happen. I think Delaney is dead in the water. Why he would put himself in a position where he's sort of standing in a ground like this, like watching football. I mean, I can't understand that mentality.
And I mean, I think that's why you and I are not the CEO of leading sporting organisations. That I think that there will be an element of ego, that this is a mini tour de force, that I've secured this tournament for this country, and I ought to be there, I deserve to be there, and I will be there. And if he takes that with him into retirement, like if that, he's only young, he's only 51, I mean, he's got a lot of years left, but I think if he's forced out of the FAI, he won't be leaving saying, well, at least I was there for the
the under-17 tournament. I mean, that won't be part of the narrative, you know. And it's kind of hard. I mean, I look at John Delaney. I knew John reasonably well in, you know, around sort of 2001, 2002, when I was a sports writer with the Sunday Tribune. And John looked like he was the coming man in sports administration. I mean, he was fantastic. I mean, he spoke sense on the Aircon Park issue. You know, he had all the figures worked out. He showed that this was not feasible. You know, the FAI building a stadium of their own in West Dublin was not feasible, and the sensible thing was to go in with the IRFU and to have a stadium within walking distance of Dublin city centre. The Saipan issue, when, you know, Brendan Menton, I think wasn't really a strong voice during that time during Saipan, and John Delaney stepped forward and did prime time and did the 6-1 news, did all those things. Yeah. And you looked at him and you thought, this guy, he was only in his late 20s or maybe early 30s, and you looked at him and you thought, you know, this guy's special. So to see him, I mean, I haven't seen John for years and years, but to see him now become that guy, you know, the huge salary, you know, the 6-figure salary, and, you know, they say you have to pay these big salaries if you want to get the best people, but unfortunately for the FAI, they don't get the best people. Even they just pay the big salary. To see him, you know, having all of his bills paid by the FAI, to see him sitting in front of an Oireachtas committee, refusing to answer questions, essentially pushing this young guy forward to answer questions for him, a guy who's been there for a few weeks.
2 weeks, I think, yeah.
And to see how nervous he was, you know, under this enormous public scrutiny, and Delaney sitting there silently. And then when the question was asked, who's that guy sitting behind you? And somebody answers for Delaney, it's his legal advisor, and no name is offered. I mean, this stuff, you couldn't have believed it of Delaney 17 or 18 years ago. And it's sad to see that he's just become that figure, you know, that he's just been, when I look at him, I just think, what a disappointment, you know. Yeah.
And there's time to play out in the jet as well. It's, as you say, the Sunday Times, obviously every week has something new and some developments there as well. One development I do want to touch on that story before we leave it was from John Fallon in the Times Ireland edition this morning, writes about an approach from the FAI to Brian Kerr and to Des Casey that a call has been put in. They'd like them to appear at some games. Brian Kerr has some interesting things to say about it.
I mean, it's a sad. I mean, it's one of the sad things about Irish football. It happens in rugby as well, that you've got, you know, people like Eddie O'Sullivan and
just Declan Kidney
that once you get to the top is seen as becoming the manager of the national team, and then once you've done that and you've failed at that at the end, you've nothing left to contribute. And that was the case with Kerr. I mean, Kerr, the FAI should have found a role for Kerr after he stopped being Ireland manager, but I know there was a personality clash between Delaney and Kerr. They weren't fans of each other, but Kerr was pushed out, ostracised. And I think from this story, it says that he lost his tickets to international matches.
Yes, he did.
That's a terrible thing. I mean, this is a man who brought Ireland great success at underage level, who's one of the best football brains in the country, and he has to buy tickets like I have to buy tickets. You know, I mean, that's terrible. But there's clearly some effort to get him and Des Casey. I mean, I haven't been aware of Des Casey for a few years, but they're clearly trying to get sort of some of the old faces back on side. And I think probably having Brian Kerr's face in the crowd at the under-17s would be a smart thing to do for the FAI, because it looks like this new era they're talking about has Kerr's imprimatur. So that's clearly what they are, and very, very smartly Brian Kerr put the phone down on them, presumably after telling them exactly what he thought of it.
The other story that we'll just touch on, because we do want to get to your Liverpool top 5, which I think is where we're going next, Tommy, if I'm right. Now we're going to Phil after this. Mo Farah and Haile Gebrselassie, this is a story that's sort of run on bizarrely for a few days. Haile Gebrselassie saying that two legends of the athletics game, clearly, saying that Farah holds a grudge over him because he had denied access to one of his own hotels in Ethiopia for a guy who, it was said, coached Farah, although I think he denies it, in Ethiopia. This was 2016. Jema Aiden is the coach, still under a police investigation for some dealings with drugs somewhere along the line, and a drug sting. So it was disputed whether he'd worked with Farah or not. Worth pointing that out. Haile Gebrselassie also accused Farah of assaulting a couple at a training gym. There's all sorts of interesting little nuance about it. The Farah had and his entourage, which by all accounts seems like it's pretty exceptional, and
Jay-Z or something,
Jay-Z and large. He'd assumed, or one of his entourage had assumed, that the couple were, from my understanding of shooting his training techniques, and it turned out they were just looking at some other training techniques on YouTube, or at least that was their case. He took exception, got into a little bit of a barney. It seems like the wife of the couple got tangled up in it somehow, so there was an allegation that he'd hit a woman, obviously. He doesn't deny, I don't think, hitting the guy in this. He seems to have kicked him in the head by all accounts.
Right.
And as it turns out, the guy was like, look, it took us a few days, we got a bit of mediation and we sorted it out and everything's fine. I actually really like Mo Farah, he's a lovely guy, is what's happened
there. It's amazing. It is an amazing story.
And Farah, the other key point to it, Farah says that he had a watch, 2 phones, and about $2.5 grand stolen from one of Haile Selassie's hotels in Ethiopia.
And there was some parts of the story where they had mediation. I think their solicitors were talking about Gebrselassie hotel reimbursing him for what he'd lost. And then after this incident happened, I think Gebrselassie said, well, we tell our guests not to have more than $300 worth of gear in their room. I think you're insured up to a certain point.
Good advice.
And then it should have been in the hotel safe,
which they had offered him.
But he'd turned it down.
Change.
I mean, there's clearly something going on, but the paranoia, I think, is that's what this is a story about to me. You know, the Mo Farah's paranoia. I mean, he is without doubt probably certainly Britain's most questioned athletics star, and not without not without reason. I mean, the fact that nobody he's still sort of denying that he worked with certain coaches and this kind of thing. It's all very clandestine athletics. It's like cycling, that you have you have coaches and then you have alleged coaches as well. And it's a very paranoid world, and I can understand how moving in that world he would see somebody holding up an iPhone thinking, this guy's, going to put my training techniques online.
What was he doing, by the way?
But it's all about the paranoia of it. It isn't like, the old days where 30 or 40 years ago, you went out and did a pretty standard training regime. There's so much stuff that athletes do that we don't know about.
We do want to know about it. Right, there's loads of brilliant quotes. We'll be here until 10 o'clock this morning. We were to read out, but we're checking out some of the papers this morning. That's where we're going to leave the papers for this Friday morning.